When you think of Charlemagne, what comes to mind? Probably father of Europe, right? The legendary king who united a continent, sparked a renaissance, the whole deal. But there's another side to that legacy, a much, much darker side. We're talking about a brutal, decades-long shadow war, a conflict that reveals a very different and much more violent side to the celebrated emperor. It all kind of boils down to this one number, 4,500. That's how many men were executed on a single day. So you have to ask, right? Who were these people? And what on earth did they do to deserve this? And let's be really clear here. This wasn't a battle that got out of hand in the fog of war. Nope. This was a calculated, deliberate act. One man gave one order, and it was all carried out in a single day. And the victims? They were his own newly conquered subjects. All right, so let's set the scene. The year is 782. Charlemagne is probably thinking he's finally got the rebellious Saxons under control. But the second he leaves the region, this charismatic leader, a guy named Widukind, stirs them all up again. They end up ambushing and completely annihilating a Frankish army. It was a stunning and frankly embarrassing defeat for the king. Charlemagne's response was, well, it was swift and absolutely merciless. He marches right back into Saxony, rounds up the rebels, and, at a place called Verden, has every single one of them put to the sword. The ringleader, Widukind, actually managed to escape. But this act of shocking brutality is the core of our story today. It forces us to ask, what could possibly drive a king to do something like this? And that, right there, is the big question we're tackling. Was this the act of a madman, a genocidal tyrant who just snapped? Or was there a cold, hard political logic behind all the bloodshed? To find out, we've got to play detective here and look at the clues, starting with the enemy himself. Okay, so the first piece of this puzzle is just understanding who the Saxons actually were, because trying to conquer them was a totally different ballgame from any other war Charlemagne had ever fought before. The keyword you need to know here is genses. See, the term Saxons wasn't what they called themselves. It wasn't a single unified kingdom. It was just a catch-all label that outsiders, like the Franks, used for a whole bunch of different independent groups all living in the same general area. And this created a massive headache for Charlemagne. I mean, think about it. When he conquered the Lombards, his strategy was simple. Defeat their king, capture their capital city, Pavia, and boom, war's over. But with the Saxons, there was no single king to beat, no capital city to take. Just this patchwork of local leaders and alliances that were constantly changing. You couldn't just cut the head off the snake because there were dozens of snakes. It made his entire playbook for conquest totally useless. So, if the usual military approach wasn't going to work, what was plan B? Well, Charlemagne needed a totally different strategy. And when you look at that strategy, you start to see what was really driving him. It was this potent cocktail of raw political power and religious doctrine. You can see the link between his goals and methods so clearly here. He had these political aims like securing his borders, and he achieved them using religious means. He didn't just conquer, he converted. He tore down their pagan shrines, like the super important Irminsul, and forced them to follow church law and pay tithes. And this, right here, is the key takeaway. For Charlemagne, forcing the Saxons to become Christians, it wasn't really a spiritual mission. It was an incredibly clever political tool. The moment a Saxon got baptized, they weren't just a new Christian. They were now a full-blown subject of the Frankish crown, bound by its laws and loyal to its Christian king. I mean, just listen to this. This is part of the actual vow they had to recite at their baptism. It's so much more than a prayer. It's a public political act. When a Saxon said they renounced their old gods by name, Thunar, Woden, Saxnot, they were publicly renouncing their old loyalties, their old way of life. They were submitting to the authority of Charlemagne, who was the protector of their new god. So, did this master plan work? Did it create peace? Not even close. Instead, this whole strategy of forced conversion locked both sides into a vicious 32-year cycle of violence. It raged from 772 all the way to 804. And the pattern was just depressingly predictable. You could set your watch to it. As soon as Charlemagne and his main army were busy somewhere else, a faction of Saxons would rebel. In response, he'd come roaring back with overwhelming force, crush the uprising, conduct more mass baptisms, and take hostages to ensure good behavior. Then, a tense peace would settle in, until the next time he turned his back. So, after looking at the enemy, the motives, and this brutal cycle of war, let's circle back to our main question. Was this a holy war against pagans, like some people have claimed over the years? The truth, as it usually is a lot more complex. This wasn't a holy war. It was a war for imperial control, and religion was the main tool he used to achieve it. Plus, the Saxons weren't some unified resistance. Some of their elites willingly joined Charlemagne's project. Now, the massacre at Verden was exceptionally brutal, no doubt about it. But it also kind of fit a pattern. Charlemagne's family, the Carolingians, had a history of dealing with rebels with pretty extreme ruthlessness. But we can't downplay the brutality. Even for the 8th century, this was extreme. We have records from Northumbria, across the English Channel, where scribes at the time wrote that Charlemagne must have gone mad to unleash that kind of destruction. And you know, when your own contemporaries, people living in that violent era, think you've gone too far, that's a pretty telling sign. So, in the end, Charlemagne is one of history's most fascinating and most paradoxical figures. The father of Europe? Yes, but his legacy was forged with both stone and sword. It was built on a foundation of political unity, sure, but also on the graves of thousands who stood in his way. Which leaves us with a question that echoes through history. Can a great unifier also be a brutal conqueror?